Be sure to hop on over to the Spiritual Broadcast Network. It's the go-to place for all things spiritual. You'll discover internet television shows that you won't find anywhere else. You can also choose from hundreds of hours of spiritual documentaries and movies. You'll enjoy on-demand and live internet television programming 24/7. Best of all, we add new dramas, comedies, talk, and reality shows and more on a daily basis. So why spend countless hours searching the web when you can quickly find just what you want on the Spiritual Broadcast Network? Good evening. Welcome to the Spiritual But Not Religious Show. I'm your host, George Lewis. I've got a really fun show lined up for us tonight. Not only fun, but informative, too. We're going to talk about yoga. But before I introduce my guest tonight and his books, I should say, I want to talk about the Spiritual Broadcast Network's website. Listen, you're in for a treat there. If you're looking for anything in the way of spirituality, you're going to find it there. We have over 200 hours, actually over 400 hours of video. We've got articles, we've got shows, we've got special guests. We're really working at being your go-to place for anything spiritual. So be sure and browse around, take a look. If you're watching this in the archives, sbnvideo.tv, take a little quick run over there. You'll have a great time. My guest tonight is Brian Leaf. Brian is the author of 6 books. We're going to talk tonight about the Misadventures of a Garden State Yogi. Fun book, informative. Whole different kind of a slant on yoga. I'm sure that you're going to enjoy it. Brian has written 4 books that cover the SAT and ACT tests. He's a prolific author and writes well. The book is an easy read, a great read, and just well written. He hails from Massachusetts. We're going to find out how they fared up there and all this monster weather that's been going on up there. He also has a school up there in Massachusetts that we'll have him tell you about if you're into these academic things where you need some help with your SAT scores and boosting them up. I'm sure from what I can see, Brian's got to be the right guy for you. So, Brian, hello there.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I've been looking forward to talking with you. I have to tell you, I had many good laughs here in your book. Oh, you know what, Brian? Did you mute your Skype audio? It is?
Yeah.
Is he watching the show?
Are you watching the show on anything else?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. We got a little feedback. Tom,
I can take off the speakerphone if you want and pick up the receiver.
I don't think that's where it's coming from. I'm not hearing it, Tom. But
Shut me down.
is that right? Okay, give me just a second. Let me see what I can do on this. Maybe I can take care of this for us. There, I think I found the problem. How's that, Tom? That take care of it?
I don't hear anything here at all.
Okay, that's because
The feedback.
now you should. There you go. Okay, a little technical problem. Thanks for your patience. And you were saying, or I was saying, we got lost in the middle of this. Oh, I wanted to find out about how you fared with the storms up there. Did they get up your way?
Yeah, the storm. It's funny as you asked me that a siren goes by, but
Right.
no, I live in Northampton, Mass, which is in western Massachusetts, and the storm sort of went by us. Not much happened here. I think a little ways away in the Berkshires, in further west in Massachusetts, they maybe got hit a little harder. I noticed there were a lot of school closings over there.
Right. Boy, that's a mess down there. You're fortunate. To be honest with you, I hate to see it happening up there, but boy, we get our share of that down here. I was glad we're not fighting that particular storm.
My folks are in New Jersey, and I think they don't have power right now. New Jersey got hit a little harder than we did.
Wow, Tom, did we lose his video because you're not seeing any movement at all? Yeah,
over here.
Yeah.
I've got movement on Skype. not on these.
It's been one of those nights down here, Brian. We've had technical things from a previous show. I don't know what the gremlins are out, I think, but
I wonder if it is the storm, actually, because I was on Skype with someone from Canada earlier, and she was having some issues. So maybe there's just, something going on in the wires all over or whatever.
Well, I think there is. That what happens, this stuff, you get a storm like that, it just has, broad-ranging effects. So we don't seem to have the video, but we do have the.
We have a solid picture of them.
How about on the? We got a good photo, so we'll just go with that. So one of the things I found really interesting, because I had back when I was in the real estate business for about 17 years down in Fort Myers, and I once sold a house to a couple who were living up north, I think New Jersey or somewhere up in that area, maybe it was Ohio. And they bought the house, left. They were just tickled pink, and they got, I guess, up to Georgia, and they called me and said, "We got to put that house back on the market. My wife has colitis, and she's just it's just gone crazy on her. She's worried about it." And so when I see that, that's kind of what led you into this whole enlightenment idea, is it not?
Yeah, so I was 16 years old, and I was living in New Jersey, and I was very intense. I was #1 ranked debater in New Jersey.
Really?
Yeah, and I I got straight A's. I was very, very intense, stressed out, and I came down with ulcerative colitis. And then when I went to Georgetown University for college, just on a lark, just as a goof, really, just as a silly thing, I signed up for yoga. I had no idea what it was.
Right.
And when I got into it, over time, I realized that it was having an effect on the way I felt. You want me to say more about that? So what happened was, George?
Yeah, I thought we lost the audio there for a minute. I'm glad to hear your voice. Go right ahead.
Okay. Okay. So anyway, I went off to Georgetown University, and I started, and just on a goof, I started studying yoga. And then what happened was, about a year and a half later, the colitis came out of remission.
Oh, wow.
And by then I was really into yoga, and I made the leap. I realized that when I did the yoga, it actually affected how I felt, which now makes total sense. But at the time, it was a huge leap for me. And so I decided to self-medicate with yoga. So when the symptoms came back, first I tried the meds, and they weren't working, actually. That's what happened. I remember my doctor told me that it might be harder to get under control the next time.
Right.
So meds, they weren't working. I was really upset, and I was sort of terrified. I was worried about surgery or who knows what. And then I made this link between the yoga and how I felt. And so I decided to medicate with the yoga. So I started doing yoga 5 times a day, sun salutations and relaxation. And, it was a very big commitment. But literally after 3 days, the symptoms disappeared.
So do you think it was the yoga, or you were meditating too, correct?
At the time, I wasn't meditating. What it was is I would do sun salutations and then a relaxation and then corpse
okay,
pose.
Right.
I wasn't meditating yet then. Now I love now I have a very rich meditation practice, but then I didn't. And I think that in that little short burst, it was really the yoga. 2 years later, the colitis came back again. And this time I didn't even try meds, actually. This time I just went straight to the yoga. By then I had my yoga practice was, even richer, even more involved. And I just went straight to the yoga. I did the sun salutations 5 times a day with relaxation. And again, it disappeared. And I've never really had it since.
Wow, that is a big commitment. 5 times a day.
I don't do 5 times a day now. I only did that when I was, sick.
Sure.
Now I do, yoga once a day.
Well, is colitis stress induced a big part of that causes the flare-ups? Is that part of it, or is it a viral thing?
Okay, well, that's interesting. I mean, I'm not sure now, 20 years later, what the exact standing, of the AMA is or whatever on that. I certainly would say that it's stress-related. And I'm sure they would, I'm sure doctors would probably agree. I know that 20 years ago when I had it, they were looking into that and there was speculation. But, basically colitis means an inflammation of the colon, right?
Right.
Ulcerative colitis, which is what I had, and usually what people have when they speak about colitis, is an ulcer in the colon, basically.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, really, certainly in my case, it was stress-related. It was intensity-related.
Right.
It's like my body turning in on itself and digesting. I like to think of it as, it's kind of like eating a hole in the wall of my colon. So certainly I would say stress-related.
Well, when you talk about eating a wall in your colon, isn't that really, I think these days what kills more people is being eaten up from the inside? I had cancer in 2005, rectal cancer, and that was what was going on. There was something inside of me that was eating me alive.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
it's pretty
and
amazing.
I know that for me, as I talk about in the book, there were different stages of healing it. The first stage was through the physical yoga, I like to think of the sun salutations basically as giving a massage to my colon, giving a massage to the organs in my body.
Ah, that's interesting.
Yeah, the sun salutation, you're bending forward, you're bending back, you're bending forward, you're bending back with breath, and so it's like bringing fresh breath into the body, as
Right.
well as massage and moving blocks, getting the circulation. I mean, let's face it, the better the circulation, both literally with blood and figuratively with energy, the healthier the body's going to be. So that was what I think the yoga was doing. And then over time, I would say the biggest subtle thing I did was learning to feel and express and let flow my emotions. I think really I'd been holding in my emotions all that time.
Right.
And, in Ayurveda is like the medical side of yoga.
Yes.
They literally say that if you hold something in or block something, if you block one of the channels of the body, literally or energetically, it builds up and eventually it basically eats its way out a different way, like an ulcer, Like, you shouldn't hold in a sneeze because it'll affect the pressure in your ears or whatever, that sort of thing. And so I believe I had been holding in all my emotions and they were just, sitting in my gut. And that's, I think, what really made me sick.
Well, I personally think you're really right on with that. I've had a similar experience when I looked at the cancer that was going on for me. It was in my rectal area, and there was an emotional, traumatic kind of thing going on in my life that I couldn't pass. And so, so really, what you're saying really connects on my end of it. So when did you find out you had ADD?
Okay, so that was the colitis stuff was about when I was, around 20, 22.
Uh-huh.
And maybe, I guess, I don't know, about 7 years later, something like that, I was seeing a therapist, and she suggested that, maybe I wasn't the just a free-spirited hippie like I thought I was traveling around,
Uh-huh.
but that maybe I was that too, maybe, but that I was, avoiding commitment and avoiding settling down and moving somewhere and setting up roots and having a job because it was hard for me. It was hard for me to stay with something, to stay focused with something. And she suggested that maybe I had ADD and that was getting in the way. At first I was very upset. I thought, I saw the symptoms she was referring to. I saw that, the telltale symptoms of ADD she was describing was true for me.
Right.
So, I was really upset. I thought, boy, does this limit what I can do? Am I ever going to be able to get married and be committed and have a job and support a family? And then I remembered, after a few days of being upset, I got really motivated, and I remembered what had happened with colitis. I thought, well, maybe like colitis, because if you ask a mainstream doctor, they'll say colitis is in your body, it's the way you're wired, and you have it, that's it. But, in holistic health, we believe you can take the reins on something. You can have an effect on it, change your life. I believe that the body is like a hologram of the consciousness. I believe that we can affect everything. I don't think anything is wired permanently. So, I thought, well, maybe there's a way in which I can change my lifestyle and not have ADD. So I started doing a lot of research, doing reading and looking into it. And finally, in an article, this is how I got into Ayurveda. In an article about Ayurveda, I read that a certain imbalance can look like ADD. So I started doing a lot of research looking into that. And that's how I made the leap. And that's how I got really into Ayurveda, which in Ayurveda, ADD would be like an imbalance of the Vata dosha, which is the quality of air. And so I started doing this whole really, really dedicated regimen, much like I had with colitis, to balance my Vata dosha and try to bring that into alignment and see if it would affect the ADD.
Well, when you were talking about your colitis and the strict regimen you were having with your sun salutations, I wondered if breath was a big part of that for you at that point anyhow. And that's kind of what you're talking about now, is you really started to focus on your breath?
With the ADD?
Yeah.
Well, actually, no, not necessarily. I mean, I do actually. I do love breathing exercises very much. But no, what it was is so in other words, in Ayurveda, and I'll just say this for listeners who might not know. So in Ayurveda, there's three proclivities, they say, that describe people. It's like a constitutional medicine. There's air, fire, and water, earth, basically.
Right.
And so somebody of the air element, which is me, called vata in Sanskrit, has a tendency to be really airy, which, you could see how that would look like ADD. It's like spaciness.
Sure.
So it wasn't breathing exercises per se I was talking about, although I do, appreciate breathing exercises.
Right.
Part of my type of yoga I do now. But no, so the regimen that I went on for the ADD was basically a certain diet, to anything that you'd see in the books that balances out the vata dosha. So one thing is, let's say this. So you know how the quality of air, when they say air describes a person, they mean that pretty literally.
Right.
Like, you know how air will expand to, literally a property of gas is that will expand to meet its container. We learned that like in physics or whatever. And so a vata person will literally just be expansive to the point where they could get spaced out and, ADD, distracted, like a space case,
Right.
So one of the main interventions in Ayurveda for that dosha, for that constitution, is to give basically a container. A vata person does really well with predictability, routine, regimen, like knowing what their schedule is going to be for the day, as opposed to an earthy person who might get really bored and stuck in that environment. So, one thing I did was I affected my daily routine, literally, so that I would, instead of being such a hippie on the road, I kind of knew what I would do each day.
Right.
And that allowed my mind to relax, and it allowed my spaciness to calm a little bit. And then I used foods that are grounding for vata. There's like a list of foods in any Ayurveda book that are kind of soothing and grounding to the vata dosha. And then I used gentle yoga, certain kinds of yoga, certain kind of breathing exercises, certain kind of meditation, to balance my proclivity for airiness, basically.
Well, above all that you've done here, I hear one thing that is so imperative if we're going to really accomplish anything, really, and it just kind of shines through your whole story, and that's self-discipline. All that you're talking about took a great deal of discipline and desire.
It's true, and I'm very grateful to have had access to that. I know that, I've experienced other things in my life that are very challenging, and it's hard to have the discipline. So
right.
In this case, I must say it came kind of easily, so I'm grateful for that. And I know that, that's the main thing that stands in the way for everybody, for people. A lot of us know what we should do sometimes, but we don't do it because it's very hard. And that's why, pharmaceuticals are so popular, because it's so easy to take a pill. It's so much more work to meditate, do yoga, run, all that stuff.
Well, anytime you check out the spiritual path, and people, if you get right down deep to what most people are looking for, it's just what you just said. Where's the pixie dust? Give me the pill, the magic wand. Come on, what are you talking about? Chop wood, carry water here.
Yeah. I think one of the keys is, in our culture, we're so not accustomed to really tuning in and listening to what calls us and listening to where our true passion is. So often, the place where our true passion is, people write it off because it seems like, well, that's too easy, or that doesn't make sense, or they have this idea of what they should be into or what they should do.
For sure.
People tuned in, they might find their passion, and it might not be yoga for someone else. It might be Tai Chi or basketball or something, But I really think there's like a rightness that calls us, and if we listen to it, I think it would make the self-discipline piece go easier.
Oh, I'm absolutely certain that you're correct in that. It's like if you have a job that is your passion, it isn't a job. You can work hours and hours and hours, and you don't feel like you've worked at all.
And the funny thing is, a lot of times I think people will turn down a job like that because I don't know, there's something that doesn't feel like work to them or something.
Oh,
It
yeah.
reminds me of a conversation once with my wife. We were talking about what she should do next for work, and so I said, well, what would you do if you could do anything, And she said, well, of course, if I could do anything, I would be a baker. But everybody would say that. And, I thought to myself, I wouldn't
No. Oh, that's great. So is she a baker?
No, actually, she's at home with our boys. And I don't even know if she still feels that way, but she did in the moment.
Right. Well, I think you're absolutely right. So I want to go back a bit in your early life and in your family life. To be into yoga and to Ayurveda and the kind of thinking and spiritual life that you've found with meditation. How does that compare with how you were growing up? What did you grow up with? I mean, did you come from a family that had these kind of beliefs, or were you in a different spiritual environment?
Yeah, I was pretty different. I mean, I grew up in a very, mainstream way in New Jersey. I grew up Jewish. We would go to temple. Like a lot of people in mainstream religions these days. Unfortunately, I didn't find a lot of spirituality in what we did. Which is unfortunate because I think, Judaism as well as Christianity and all the other religions, of course there's a rich, storehouse of spirituality there, but I didn't find myself being exposed to it particularly when I was a kid. And I just grew up in a very mainstream way. It was actually, so when I went to Georgetown and I signed up for this yoga class, again, I didn't know what I was signing up for, and I remember the first day, I was waiting on a bench with like 30 other women.
Huh.
And I thought, where am I? What is going on here? I didn't know yoga attracted mostly women at the time.
I should have found this earlier.
What's that?
I should have found this place earlier.
You'd think I'd feel that way, but I was actually terrified for some reason. I don't know. I was very intimidated.
I understand.
Yeah. So, and then the teacher showed up, and he was wearing all whites, and he had this big beard, and I'd never seen anybody like him before. He was wearing leather sandals. And it was like I was coming home when, as soon as yoga class started, again, it didn't really take self-discipline because I just had found what I was meant to do. Right in the first class, I just knew what I'd found. It reminds me exactly of what I felt like when I met my wife. The first day I met my wife, I just knew something important was happening.
Uh-huh.
And it was the same with yoga. When in that first yoga class, I don't know, I just knew. I mean, I couldn't have put it to words the way I am now 20 years later, but, I just knew something was going on. I knew I had found something important, and I just felt at home in the yoga class, with the way it was. Funny enough, because it was at a Catholic school, the yoga class was taught with some Christian prayers in it, but I had no idea that they were Christian prayers because I was Jewish. I thought they were like straight from the Bhagavad Gita.
Right. Well, so when you were talking about the richness in Christianity and Judaism, it's really found in the mystical traditions, isn't it? You didn't find your way to the Kabbalah at all, then?
No, that's true. You're right. I mean, a lot of it's true. And in Judaism, it's the Kabbalah, and Christianity, it's some of the more mystical traditions. It's true. And in Hinduism, it's yoga in that way, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's very much a mystical kind of tradition.
Yeah. Now, I had an, by the way, you were talking about my childhood. And so, like I say, I grew up in a very mainstream way. But funny enough, I had an aunt who lives in Florida who was into this stuff way back when. So she was my first and sort of only exposure at that time. She was macrobiotic in the 70s. She was doing transcendental meditation in the 70s. And, as a little kid, I just thought it was funny, like she'd go into a room and we couldn't go talk to her, and I asked her what she would do, and she'd say she repeated the same word over and over again, and it just seemed crazy to me,
Yeah, mantra doesn't make any sense, does it, when you're first exposed to it?
Right. Or she would take out we'd go to a restaurant when she'd be visiting, and she and my uncle would take out these herbal tea bags. And I remember my parents were, kind of afraid of them. They'd say, oh, no, don't have any of that. We don't know what that is.
Well, I would relate, I'm sure, very much to your aunt and uncle, because I was on the same path in the early 70s and have, pretty much stayed on it since then. So I want to, one of the things that you talk about in your book that I think is just hugely important, especially if there's going to be any really meaningful changes in our systems, our living systems, our governing systems, and that is learning to cultivate and follow our intuition.
Yeah.
Speak to us a bit about that, if you would.
Well, that is, I do feel like, at least, now, that is my primary mission. That's my primary spiritual work, is to do that. And I agree with you. I actually think that's what we all need. I think that what gets in the way, really, of a lot of things is when people are thinking of how to be in the world. Like when I was younger and I was very ungrounded, and I think honestly this was the root of the ADD, actually, like underneath even the diet and all that. Just as underneath with the colitis, I think the root of the colitis was this angst I was storing in my belly. I think the root of the ADD was I was living from my head,
right.
Thinking about how to be all the time. And my work in the last 20 years of healing really, and continues to be, obviously it's a work in process, is to try to tune into and then really live from this deep sense of knowing, like this, you can call it prana, following energy or intuition or wisdom, and I think I really believe there's this benevolent, intelligent energy kind of, I think Yoda had it right, and I think if we tune into and follow our intuition moment by moment, I just think it's a much more peaceful, abundant path of less suffering for everybody.
Yeah, I think Yoda had it right too. That Star Wars stuff really had an impact with me. I think he was pretty right on with a whole lot of what he talked about.
And it's funny because we live in a culture right now where, Malcolm Gladwell, for example, wrote some really popular books.
Tipping Point and a few. Yeah, he's written some really great books.
And, like he talks a lot about intuition in I think one or two of his books, right?
Uh-huh.
But it's funny because in order for people, it's kind of ironic if you think about it, in order for people in our culture to accept the idea of intuition, he backed his ideas up with hundreds, copious amounts of studies. And I'm actually not a huge fan of studies ultimately because I think studies can be really manipulated and they're really ultimately about convincing the mind.
Right.
And really to really get on this path of clarity and abundance and peace and prosperity, really we need to go beyond the mind and tune into this truth, this faith, this intuition.
Well, the difficulty in a patriarchal society, which we have, any way you want to cut it, it's trying to change, is that for males, I don't know how you grew up, but I grew up in an era where the idea of emotions for a male was a no-no. And,
right.
and until you get into your emotional body, you can't get to your intuition.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
It's
You're
all,
right.
It's all head stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems so foreign, I think, to many people or in our culture. It's so weird, to have this idea that there's this inner knowing, and it's really the best and most reliable guidance to follow. But I think you're right. I think that's part of my path. You're right, actually, was first healing the colitis and the ADD, and part of that healing was opening to the emotional body. And you're right. It's only in opening to that the deeper guidance, the intuition can flow through. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, well, I think there's a real restriction there, and you kind of open that valve up before you can really start to let this stuff flow. I really work like you at this intuition thing and getting more and more open to it. I have for many years. I've found that I can be leaving my home in the morning, and the sun is shining. There's a blue sky, and this thought will come. Hey, take your umbrella. And I say, nah, it's not gonna. And I go. By the time I get home, I'm soaked.
Yeah.
It's rained, and I just didn't listen to that part of me, which somehow or other knew that was what was going to happen.
It's amazing to me. I'm so committed to this. This is really my mission right now. Just as maybe the colitis was, at the time, or the ADD was. Listening to the intuition is my current really project, and it's amazing to me that sometimes, like you're saying, it's amazing to me that I'm so committed to it, and sometimes for some crazy reason, and I believe so deeply in it, and for some crazy reason, sometimes I still ignore it, you know?
Yeah.
I'll have I'm about to send an email to somebody, and I'll have an intuition, don't send it. But, you know, my mind and my ego are so wrapped up in, I don't know, getting it done, checking it off my to-do list, or wanting the response from somebody, and I say, oh, no, and I just send it anyway. And then, you know, every time that I don't listen to it, it becomes clear that I should have. It's so clear to me that that's the way I should live. It's such a clear, healthy way to live.
Yeah, and it will take us out of about any trouble that we're in. I think you really hit the key to that whole process, though, is that false pride and that ego part of us. You know, it wants to be in charge and the ruler of our lives. I don't know about you, but it's taken me to some places I don't care to go back to.
Definitely, yeah, absolutely.
So let's go back to your book. You've got some pretty interesting stories in here. I want to get to the 8 keys to happiness, which I think, you know, that whole concept just, you know, like most people are interested in that. And I think, you know, without following this intuition, getting to that place is pretty difficult to get to if you can get there at all. But I want you to talk about your spiritual experience with the Grateful Dead. Now, I know a lot of people who feel they've had a spiritual experience with the Grateful Dead, but tell us what happened for you.
Well, okay, so just a little bit of background. I got really into a certain kind of yoga called Kripalu yoga, and I got really into it, and I was planning on doing a teacher training with them. And then back in, I think it was about 1995, the guru was asked to leave, you know, under a scandal. So I was really upset. So first I gave up yoga, but then I realized I couldn't. It was just part of who I was. So I went on this road trip with a friend of mine. We fitted a van with a futon, and we went on this road trip. And my mission was to try as many styles of yoga as I could.
Oh, cool.
And so we would travel around and do yoga. And so we were in North Carolina and visiting these friends of his, and they were real big ex-deadheads. They were big deadheads. And so the dead was coming through town, so they got tickets for us to go. And it had only been my second show, actually. You know, I wasn't a big music guy even, really. I wasn't a big Dead guy. So we go, though, and, you know, I was really enjoying it. It's a great scene. It's just really, talk about listening to your intuition. You know, part of it is processing through the emotional body and opening up. Part of it is just really being free enough to listen.
Absolutely.
You ever hear that great story, just as a side note? I heard this great story recently from a book, I guess, where it talked about how when Columbus's ships were first seen in the New World by the Native Americans, only the shamans could see the ships because, you know, everybody else just had never even heard of a ship coming in off, you know, far away from the ocean. They just had never seen anything like that. It wasn't in their mind frame. They couldn't even imagine it. So they literally, I don't know if it's true, but according to this book, and the reports of the Native Americans, they literally couldn't, their brain couldn't even encode it because it didn't exist to them. Whereas the shamans were so open that they could see them, you know.
Well, you know, I read that same article, and I'm convinced that's true. I just watched a show on one of the PBS or something about how we see and how illusion works, and you know, like they work where, you know, they'll throw a ball up 6 times, and so your mind is seeing that ball, and then the 7th time, when the ball is, they don't throw the ball, but you see the ball.
Oh, wow.
The whole show was very, very interesting. It backs up what you're talking about completely.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, you know, like in cultivating intuition, that's another thing that it's so important to. And it's the same, I suppose, as opening to the emotion body. But another thing that's so important is really just opening. Opening to, you know, when I sit at my altar and I sit on my cushion, one of the things that I try to do is just open my vision so that I can, you know, I try to clear my vision. I call it clear the mechanism. I got it from some baseball movie, actually. But, you know, I'll say clear the mechanism, and I just try to clear away, because in clearing away, it allows room to see what's really there. So anyway, so at the Dead Show, you know, one thing I admired at the Dead Show was there was so much freedom, you know, just really a lot of freedom. So I was at the Dead Show, and we were going around looking at different, you know, going to different spots to hear the music. And at one point, we were really far from the stage, and we were sitting on these bleacher seats. And I was trying to sing along, but I don't know the words that well, and it was kind of a heady experience, actually, because I was trying to follow the words, and make sense of it. And then, I don't know, at some point, I just decided to surrender. It was very loud, and it was a lot of energy, and I decided instead to just feel the music, not to think about it, not to try to follow it even, because I didn't know the words. So I just felt the music, and I felt it like radiating in me, just like vibrating in me.
Uh-huh.
And then out of nowhere, this was I'd never had an experience like this before. Out of nowhere, and the energy was building, and it was my body was kind of vibrating with it, and I was really feeling it. And then out of nowhere, I literally saw a green light travel between me and way far away, straight to Jerry Garcia.
Oh, wow.
And I started crying, and I started chanting Om and just crying. And I remember I literally had to hook my toes underneath the bleachers because I felt as though I was being pushed back by this tube of green light. And it was like a energy experience. It was beautiful. It was like a Shakti pot. It was like a real charged, high energy experience.
Those kind of experiences change us at a depth, I think, that it takes time for us to really comprehend just what kind of changes and how much has occurred, don't they?
Yeah. And, as people have been reading the book, it's interesting that I've had a lot of people email me or Facebook or, in interviews tell me that they had some kind of similar experience at a Dead show.
Oh, really?
I think that must have been one of Jerry Garcia's, obviously when somebody draws an audience and a community around them in a spiritual way like he did, there must be, he must have been a channel for some real deep, powerful love energy or transformational energy, because a lot of people reported a similar experience.
Well, there certainly was some kind of energy, something that wasn't observable that went on with Garcia and with that band, that's for sure. These kinds of things, along with the intuition, may be one of our only ways, especially if we don't have a teacher to help us, to come out from behind all this enculturation that's got us so trapped.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that we believed, 30 years ago that, like we scoff at today, but 30 years ago it was the gospel. And there's no reason to think that it's that we still don't cling to a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your 8 keys, the 8 keys to happiness, and maybe if we have time, we'll get into the 10 commandments of yoga.
Yeah. So basically, as I was organizing the book,
Let me interrupt you before we go there. I want to talk a bit. I want to see if we can't get some people interested in your book. It's a really great read. It's the Misadventures of a Garden State Yoga. Where can they buy those? You sell them yourself, or is it just through publishing houses?
they should be able to get it anywhere. Any bookstore,
Yep.
either have it or be able to order it. Of course, they can get it online from Barnes & Noble or Amazon. It should be available anywhere books are sold.
Okay, fantastic. I would highly recommend Brian's book. It's a great read. Pick it up. I think you'll find some things there that'll help you with your life. Now, back to the eight keys to happiness.
Yeah, so as I was structuring the book, I didn't have them in there in the first draft.